Door on that side, left side. Welcome back. Good afternoon. And this morning we have an opportunity to listen to the excellent presentation on global perspective. And this afternoon, and we will come back to reality and how we handle PRRS from an Asian perspective. And the next two speakers is from a long-time internal expert, and like our marketing indicated, we sell solutions. And then with this good vaccine, how do we implement those global practices that's worked in the West and move to the East, to Asian area? So that's for the next two, and of course, we save the best to the last. And Professor Yang would give you an update of the blood and sweat of the Chinese PRRS story. So coming next is Dr. Poul H, Rathkjen, and PH got his DVM from the Royal Veterinary College of Copenhagen, and joined the BI 2005, and climbed the ladder being a technical manager in Denmark, and then regional to Nordic, and now global. And he has all his hand on this PRRS control. Now is in the position of senior manager for PRRS product. So now, Paul is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come here. And I'm very humble about this task as a European to come to Asia and try to tell you how to handle PRRS with knowledge that, as Mike Murtagh used to say, that we only have baby PRRS in Europe, so how would I know to handle PRRS around the globe? But I'll try to use some of the experience that I learned from others. Therefore, I'm also very honored to be here on the same stage as the very experienced gentleman we heard this morning. Not only experienced due to the color of their hair, I'm getting the same color soon, I think, but also because I learned a lot from them. Tom Gillespie, I've known for almost 20 years. I learned him to know almost 20 years ago when he came to Denmark, trying to help us solve some PRRS problems. At that time, we didn't know anything about PRRS. And since then, we've been trying to learn what we could, and a lot of that from US. And you'll also see in my slides referring to some of his experiences and the US experiences. And also Dr. Murtagh. Later on, we went to US and tried to learn and understand more about immunology. And you'll see also references that I have directly taken from his mouth. And on top of that, of course, having been working 20 years with PRRS, I found out that practical applying of management methods is crucial to understand and control PRRS. So I'll come back to this, and you'll see this is a very practical-oriented presentation. Got the question, so what do I do if I have two types of PRRS circulating in a farm? So the first statement is actually, yes, if you're applying more than one MLV vaccine on a farm, you already have more than one type of PRRS circulating on a farm. But I guess that's not really the question. So the question here is probably more the what do I do if I have both a type 2 and a type 1 circulating on a farm? And the answer to that question is quite simple, actually. So I learned that also from Dr. Murtagh. So just control the most important PRRS type you have, which is, we also learned that today, it is type 2. Globally, whenever PRRS type 2 is circulating on a farm, it's always worse than a concurrent infection with the type 1. So our control is also always based on the control on type 2. Just to set the basic understanding of how we look at PRRS. And already at the second line here, you'll see a phrase that I probably have to rephrase after having heard the final conclusion from Dr. Murtagh. So PRRS rapidly evolves and new strains emerge. Well, is that really true that they emerge so fast? I don't know. It seems like at least strains that are very successful, they don't evolve very fast. So if we only see might be a very pathogenic strain, but it only shows up once, then it might not be that important. But what we want is to have a strain in our vaccine that generates a broad spectrum of immunity so we can provide protection. And that's actually a bit strange. You could say that until now, the most successful vaccine with regard to that is also probably the oldest vaccine we have. That has been more than 20 years on the market. So it was a good choice at that time. We want from an MLV vaccine, we want to mimic a natural infection without having any disease, and also developing a robust immune response and long duration of immunity. So that's our wish from a vaccine. As I said before, the type 2 is all over the world. So if you look at a map, you see that type 2 is a dominant virus in US and in Asia. And only in Europe we have type 1 as a dominant strain. We have some countries in Asia where they find type 1 alone on a farm, but it's still now, it seems like the prevalence is lower. So only in Europe we have PRRS type 1 as a dominant strain. In many countries still in Europe, we have both type 1 and type 2. Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium. But we also have countries in Europe where we only have a type 1 strain, like in France. Then there's a few countries that actually free of PRRS. So I come from Denmark. It's a very little tiny country up here in the Nordics. We have both strains, but just the countries around us, Norway and Sweden, they are free of PRRS today. And then we have Australia and a few other countries in Europe. The high-path PRRS, still only seen in Asia, was found in China first in 2006, and then moved across. So I think today we found in most countries in Asia. So what is our basic understanding of vaccine choice? So I won't talk a lot about the choice of vaccine, which you probably would think I would. But to me, the vaccine is actually not the only tool we have in a toolbox. And we heard a lot about vaccine until now today, and I can only agree on what has been said until now. But we know that PRRS type 2 is more virulent. It causes more disease than type 1. It evolves faster than type 1, and it has higher viral loads than type 1. We heard that from Dr. Murtagh already. It's the most predominant type everywhere on the globe except from Europe. And we rarely see type 1 as the single problem in farms except from countries in Europe. Also, when we're looking at the risk of having losses from a PRRS virus, they are substantially higher with type 2 than type 1, and especially when we're talking about high-path PRRS. So the natural thing to choose here would be to choose protection against type 2, because that's much more important than to protect against type 1. So the choice outside Europe is a type 2 MLV vaccine, and for this we heard all the results already this morning from both Dr. Murtagh and Dr. Gillespie, and it has already an amazing track record. Just from the recent APVS papers from Korea that repeatedly show reduced mortality and higher weight gain in more marketed pigs when you use Engelberg Persimmon V. So how come that we are not always successful, that we get the idea that the vaccine is not efficient? Maybe it's because our approach to the problem is not always correct. So our basic understanding of pest control is that we both want to prevent infection, and we do that by improved biosecurity, better management, and pig flow. I'll come back, sorry, mostly to the pig flow and the management. Of course, we want to maximize immunity. So referring again, Dr. Mertek saying that whenever we have a pig that is at risk of meeting a PRRS virus later in its life, it should be protected from that. So we should give it some immunity before. Sorry. And last but not least, we want to minimize the exposure. And one of the ways we can do that is actually to vaccinate piglets to reduce transmission and shedding of virus and the risk of infecting other herds. So therefore, the program here that is really important is to look at the whole herd and try to protect that. So why is it that we want to protect the whole herd? Already also, Dr. Gillespie was talking a bit about this, the whole herd control. And we know that whenever a PRRS virus comes into a farm, it could be a naive farm or it could be a previously infected farm, but that meets another virus, that the PRRS virus, it spreads to other compartments. That can go fast, and it can actually also take quite a long time before that happens. But all of a sudden, you have a whole farm infected, and then you have a risk of infecting other farms. It can be by animals. We have airborne spread of virus. There's a lot of opportunities. So all of a sudden, a successful virus can go from one farm to another and spread in a whole area. In Europe, we have a very low vaccination rate on piglets. It's probably the lowest in the whole world. You have quite high vaccination rate in Asia when it comes to piglets. In the US, it's also high, probably because there's a better understanding of this whole herd approach. Very often in Europe, you see that we are only actually looking at the breeding herd, and we're trying to protect the sows from spreading the virus to the offspring via transplacental transmission. But very often we forget that if we don't protect the piglets after they were weaned, we have a very likely to have an infection in the nursery and in the finishing. And we know that these are young animals, so they would have higher viral load than the old animals. They would transmit more virus. So the risk of getting infection back to the sow herd, if it's close or if it's a neighboring herd, it's much higher if we don't protect these piglets from getting infected. Many, many herds, both in Europe and also in Asia, we produce our own gills to put into the sow herd. So they are very often taken here from the wean or finishing site and put back into the sow herd. And if we didn't protect these from transmission, we put virus directly from our finishes and nursery into the sow herd. And if we don't control the virus here, we might have a completely different type of virus in this area than we have here. So that meaning we are always supplying with virus of different types back into the sow herd. So acclimatization of the gills is crucial in this part here. So what is the solution to that? We want a full protection of the herd, and farmers want, as also Dennis was talking about, safe and predictable production. So we want to have a stable production. So in order to do that, we need to look at this in a systematic way. You already heard about the 5-step process. I'll just repeat briefly again. We will repeat it again. And you'll also hear that later today from Dr. John Kolb. So the 5-step process is a systematic tool to apply all what we know about PRRS on the farm and do it repeatedly again and again. And the first step is to identify desired goals. I'll come back to these. The second step to determine current constraints, as you heard from Dr. Gillespie already. And then based on this, we develop some solutions. And it doesn't stop there. That's very often where we actually stop, is that we think we have developed a solution, then we leave the farm and think now we're done. Okay, everything will work fine. But if we don't monitor this and look what happens, we'll probably fail, or at least we won't be able to know if we actually achieved our goals. So just to decide on the goals, and the goals could be different from farm to farm, and they would be different from where you are in the world. So just to give maybe the two biggest varieties on this, from one end to the other. So for example, if I am in Denmark, only 30% of the farms are affected by PRRS. And if we talk to Dr. Murtek, he would say we only have baby PRRS. So it's mild. So in Denmark, we will probably go for elimination, or not only probably, we will go for elimination. The goal of almost all control programs in Denmark would be to eliminate the virus, because there's a good chance of keeping the farm free. But in other countries, it could be China, where you have a high risk of getting infected from a really nasty virus. It might not be that good idea to eliminate the virus and just get a new one. I was in a farm a few years ago. They had a really bad PRRS, type 2, and it was actually not a baby PRRS because the mortality was extremely high. So from the first batches that were born, I think from the first one, I don't know if 10% were weaned. Maybe nobody, because they started to mix pigs. And the mortality was extremely high. But we put on a good program, so we achieved actually within a year to eliminate the PRRS virus from that farm. 2 weeks ago, he got it back. And that's more than 3 years. This was in 2010 when he got it the last time, so he kept free for 5 years. But now he got it really back the same degree. This time, he said, the first thing he said, no elimination again. I won't go through this once again. So you need to look at the risk. What are the risks actually to get the virus back before you decide on the goals? Of course, you also need to know what's going on the farm. How is the status of the farm? Is there actual virus transmission, which we detect by PCR? Or if we don't find virus, maybe the pigs has been exposed anyway. Sows are not viremic for a very long time, so it might be that you don't detect virus, but you still want to know if they've been exposed. There could be a lot of constraints. I'll just work a little bit more on some of them later on, especially on pig flow and also management. So you need to look at this. How well are the people that are working on the farm actually trained to handle this problem? We also need to look at biosecurity. Again, how big is the risk of getting infected from outside? So before we develop a solution, we need to look at the goals of the farm, the PRRS status, we need to know that, but also the constraints we have. And based on that, we might decide on a vaccination program, but we also want to decide on how we manage the farm and the pig flow in order to do it in the best way. And it might be that we actually want to go into an area control program. And when we're talking about monitoring, we're not only talking about monitoring diagnostics, which is probably the easy part. We should also monitor the production, and ideally we should do it like Dr. Petri said, looking at variation, but also clinical signs, what is actually going on. Is it the purse that actually causes the problem? And on top of that, we should go in and look at the management procedures. How is it done? Is it actually done, what you told? It's not enough just to ask. Control the risk factors. Control that the vaccine is actually applied as you intended to do that. You'll find out in many cases if you go and actually look at the process where the vaccine is delivered to the pig, that's not always going on as you were thinking of. I'll show how you could monitor. So this is an example of actually a small area elimination project that we did in Denmark. So this is a quite small area. It's only 6 times 10 kilometers. And within this area, there is 12 farms, as you see here, 4 sow farms. 2 of them were stable, so they weaned actually PCR negative piglets. In all of the rest of the sites, we were able to get PRRS virus. They were continuously discussing in this area who infected whom. So these farms tried again and again to eliminate virus, and every time they eliminated, they got it back again. So always there was discussion if the virus was delivered from the finisher herds, or if they got it from the weaned to finisher herds, or if it was the sow herds. But anyway, they decided in May 2013 that they wanted to eliminate the PRRS virus from the whole area. They decided to do it the way we heard about from Dr. Gillespie early on. So they wanted to use a modified low close and modernized program. So that started 1st of July 2013. So with that, all sows, piglets, boars, and were vaccinated on the same day. So here it was actually taking place on the same day. And it was repeated 4 weeks later. Then they started to vaccinate piglets. First they did it with 7-day-old piglets, and later on they were vaccinated after weaning, and then they did it for 16 weeks. So it was coordinated. So on a certain time point, there was, for 16 weeks, there were only vaccinated animals on the whole peninsula. Critical point was actually when they stopped to vaccinate. They were trained on the 10 golden rules that I will come back to in a minute and work a bit more on. And then we started monitoring. So this is just one of the monitoring that was taking place, where this was in a sow herd, where we're looking at this is our 10-week-old piglets. So before we start the low close modernized program, what you see, the bars here reflecting the PCR positive batches, and then you can see the SP value of the ELISA monitoring of these animals. So every 5 weeks, the pigs were monitored by PCR and ELISA, and 8 weeks before the program started, you saw that 100% of the batches were viremic, and they had high ELISA ratios. Then the vaccination after 16 weeks was stopped. And as here we monitor at the end of the nursery, of course, the first batches were positive, actually not to the same extent as they were before. So we found virus, but they were low amount. And later on, from week 12, we never found virus in the nursery of this herd. But as you see here, and that's again a bit of variation, so we have the cutoff is 0.4. So only looking here at the mean, we are happy, but we also know that here we actually have some pigs that has been exposed to virus, unless they would not be positive here. Pigs from this site actually went to this weaned to finisher barn, and here you see another way of showing the results. Again, we're looking at ELISA results and PCR results. They were checked again every 5 weeks, all the batches that were present on the farm at that time. Looked very nice until we have here in February. You can see we had a batch with 100% positive on the IDEX. We didn't find virus there. And when we go back, they actually refer to the same batch that we previously saw in the sow herd. It caused us later on some problems. And that's why it took actually a bit longer than expected. Anyway, we were quite successful, so after 1 year, that was how the MAC was looking like. We had at that time one wean to finisher barn. We had negative piglets coming in, but before they went out from the finisher barn, they were positive. And these pigs, some of these pigs went to this one. So it took us a few months to get this cleaned up by a depup program. So this year, 24 months after we started the whole program, we could show this map. So it actually succeeded in getting it out. Again, this is just an example of an area where we are so fortunate that we have water on 3 sides. And here we have roads, and the next pig farms are quite far here from this one. The risk is now that somebody bring in semen or animals that we get it in again, then it will really hurt. But until now, it didn't happen. Just a few production figures. We also monitored that. So here you look at the live-born from this herd. More or less stayed the same throughout. The pre-wean mortality dropped from before 11% and down to around 8%. And also the weaned per sow per pigs actually reached, after a year, they reached 35 piglets per sow per year weaned. And they came from 32. And here, before, they struggled to get on 33. So quite successful also with regard to production. So that's fine. So was it just the vaccination that made the difference? I'm sure we couldn't have done it unless we had trained people really take care of some basic rules. And the devil is in the detail. So whenever you have a failure with a good vaccination program, you should go back and look at what's really happened with the management. You show some results. Dr. Gillespie showed some results from this study of Linares. It has been referred to several times that we're looking at the success rate and the time to stability and negative status, applying either an MLV vaccination or a live virus on farms when they use the LC program. Here, I'm looking at some other findings that he got. So here he was looking at some advices from veterinarians and veterinary clinics that they gave to the farmers or the producers that were involved in the project. So you can say they gave different advices of changing needles, washing farrowing crates, and dry out the litter bins before a new litter entered. And you can see that almost 100% of them were giving advices around this. Linares found that the highest risk to the control program was actually when you were holding back pigs in the farrowing unit to increase the weaning quality. And that advice wasn't given to a very high extent, at least it wasn't said here. To my opinion, that's probably the most important thing at all. So, already 10 years ago, we put these 10 management rules together. They are an extract, you could say, of McRebel rules, which is more than 10 rules. But here it's boiled down to 10 rules. And I still believe that if you really use a good vaccine and you apply these 10 rules, you have a really high chance of success. On the other hand, it's not like you can say that, okay, so is 5 out of 10, is that good? Or is 8 out of 10 good? Or can I do with just 9 out of 10? You need to apply them all. They're equally important. So when you cross-foster, don't only move the surplus. No cross-fostering later than 48 hours. Keep piglets in the pen and avoid to handle them outside the pen or in a basket to avoid spread of disease. Change needle between litters. Do not move sick pigs. Wean all piglets from each batch every week at the same time. Strict batch production, no contact between age groups, and so on. I'll go to each of them, just to explain a bit. The first sheet that we made, it was a laminated A5 sheet, and we sent it out to vets, customers, so they could hang it up in the barn. And it was green. The first one was green. Now we have different colors since then. The last one we made was blue. But the first one was green. A couple of years ago, I was visiting a farm, and he was complaining that his program didn't work well, so he thought there was some problem with the vaccine. And I said, so how was your management? And he said, yes, look here. Just before we entered the farm, he had this green sheet hanging in the barn. These 10 golden rules, we're doing that. Okay? So at least it was hanging there. But I'm sorry to say that's not enough. So the usual thing that go wrong, very often we see that not all piglets from the same batch are weaned at the same time. We should have no pigs in the farrowing unit. And it's more than once that I came in and saw pigs back in the farrowing unit. So let's look at them one by one. When you cross-foster, only move the surplus of pigs. So we know the best protection a pig can get, it's from its own mother. And it doesn't matter if it's a small or a big pig. So here, we don't really care about variation. So only if there's more pigs than a sow can take care of, we need to move them. If they are the sufficient number, even if they're different sizes, just let them be. And here we're talking about the variation that Dr. DiPietro was talking about. So he taught us that years ago. So just for some farmers, they like to look down to a farrowing crate and they like to see pigs of the equal size. They should be precisely the same size in this pen. Then they want to have smaller in this pen maybe and some bigger in the other pen. And then they think they reduce the variation. The opposite has actually happened. You increase the variation. So when you're looking at the total batch, now you just created some smaller pigs and some bigger pigs. Because whenever you move a piglet from a sow to another sow, not only this piglet you move reduces in weight, but you reduce the whole litter weight. So the Danish Meat Organization have been looking very much into this and found out that you reduce the weight of the weaning weight of the piglet you move by more than 160 grams. But the whole litter is actually suffering. So you're also reducing the weight of all the piglets that it was moved together with. And that's when we just talk about healthy piglets. If the pigs on top is diseased, it's even worse. A good way to do that, if you know that every week you have more live-born that you're actually, the sows are able to take care of. And you can just look in the end. So when you're weaning the sows, you know that how many pigs they wean in average. And then if in average, if they only wean 10, and you continuously put 12 piglets at them at the beginning, you know that later on you would have to move 2 pigs from each sow. So take care of that already in the beginning and have some empty crates ready to move a sow to take care of the nurse pigs that you will have anyway because you might have high litters. Years ago we saw this was a very popular picture to have, that the good manager was a girl or a guy who always were carrying a pig and moved that when it was getting too small. We don't want to see that anymore. So don't cross-foster later than 48 hours. We know that very shortly after the pigs are born, they start to lose the maternal protection. And here it's very clear that one of these pigs are not at the same age. It's more pale than the rest. Its hairy coat is longer, and it's very obvious that this is an older pig. Again, if this one was deceased and had a PRRS infection, you just moved infection not only 1 liter, and now you infected 2 liters. I did some studies almost 20 years ago, after having Tom in Denmark. I had a guy with a pig production, and he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. So he had a rule saying that I never wean a piglet that is less than 7 kilograms. So if a pig didn't have a wean weight of 7 kilo, it would stay in the farrowing unit until it had 7 kilo. In one case, I had a piglet. I followed them from before they got colostrum and until 160 days. There was one pig. I killed it at 90 days. It was still 6 kilograms, and it was still in the farrowing house. And I have no record of how many liters that pig passed during that time, but it was a huge amount of piglets that was infected from that. So keep the piglets in the pen. We know that PRRS can easily be transmitted, and it's spread by feces and blood and urine. So we put it onto a box. It's very easy to affect other piglets. And of course, you can transmit it with your castration equipment as well. Change needle. It's a good rule. It's very, very easy to move PRRS virus with a needle from one pig to another. And then don't move sick piglets. And this is really a hard one. Actually, the first time I wrote this, I said, don't move sick piglets, kill them. So that was always a rule we had a lot of discussion on. So does that mean that every time I have a pig that is sick, I should kill it? No. But if the sow can't take care of it, and you know it's diseased, so it's very likely to have an infection, a PRRS infection, you'd rather kill it than move it to another litter. And actually, you'll find out when you start to do that, that you decrease the pre-wean mortality in a barn. So when you start to kill pigs that cannot make it until finishing, so we have an idea this will never get to a slaughterhouse. Kill it. This is a really tough one, especially, I don't know how it's managed everywhere in the world, but at least we see very often that the people that take care of pigs, they got a bonus from the more live pigs they deliver to the nursery. So basically they want to keep anything possible alive. If it just can breathe until the day it's in the nursery, they are safe. Their bonus is safe. So that's the first thing we have to change. This bonus have to get away, because that's the only way to reduce the mortality in the first place. So wean all pigs from the same batch at the same time, and we don't want to have weaned pigs in a farrowing unit. Again, back to this guy where this sheet was hanging, and he had this for, almost 10 years, 8 years at least, hanging there. And I was asking him, do you have weaned piglets in your farrowing house? And he said, no. When they are weaned, we move them to the nursery. Good. So then he went in, and the first pen you saw was this. So what is this? There's no sow, because it was used for cross-fostering. So we had a discussion if these pigs were weaned. And there we had a bit of discussion of definition. So in my definition, a weaned piglet is one who is not getting milk from a sow. In his definition, a weaned pig was in the nursery. So if it wasn't in the nursery, it wasn't weaned. But anyway, that's the definition we need to agree on. The definition in this case, or with PRRS, is that a pig is weaned when there's not with a sow. And we've seen many times that just correcting this, you can change a lot. So in this case, we don't have a transmission from sows to piglets of PRRS virus. It's actually the opposite. So here we have a transmission of PRRS virus from piglets to the sows. And that can go on for years. Strict batch production sounds easy, but it's not only pigs. We also want to avoid that needles, equipment, or personnel is moving from one compartment to another. We know that a very good way of sampling PRRS virus is by using ropes to collect oral fluids. But trousers that pigs chew on, they can act as well as collection material. So that means if you're walking around in a pen and you let the piglets chew on your trousers and then you go back to some other, that is a really good way of transmitting PRRS virus from one compartment to another. Again, no contact between age groups. So here it's very obvious that these pigs, hopefully not the same age. Because if that's the case, the variety that Dimitri was talking about, it's huge here. And we know actually from investigations that Dr. Natus presented at IPVS in Korea that you increase the risk of having a respiratory infection up to 13 times when you mix pigs of different age groups. And everybody knows that. And sometimes they even think they're doing a good job with this. They're not doing that. But in real life, what happens on a lot of farms is this. So we have a finisher herd. You maybe heard Dr. Dimitri talking about variation, how to reduce variation. That's extremely important. So he thinks if he asks for pigs of the same weight range, then he can reduce variation. But he forgets that pigs are not grown equally, not either in the nursery. So he wants to have pigs between 28 and 38 kilograms, and he assumes that he would get them from here because that's the oldest pigs in the nursery. So of course he wants the full batch of that. But in real life, these pigs are not between 28 and 32 kilos. They might be between 22 and 35. So of course, you'll get some pigs from here. And what happens here is that the pigs that were too small here, they were moved somewhere else. They could be moved to some kind of buffer to collect them until they get the right weight. Or it might be that they are moved back to the younger ones. So now, because he wants the very narrow weight window here, he actually get pigs also from this compartment because some of them are high enough weight, also from this one. And of course, when the pigs up here are getting big enough, he also gets some of these. So this guy who wanted a very narrow weight window in order to reduce variation, he actually got pigs at least 4 weeks in age difference, and probably much more because it'll take some time before this 22 kilo pig reaches a 28 kilo weight. So now, instead of have a reduced variance, he has increased his variance. This guy did it because he wanted to empty his pen or his compartment at the same time so he can disinfect. But what then happened is that these are also too small, so he had to move them back. And then if you have a PRRS infection here, you also have it in the buffer. And very often we see that you might be able to wean PCR negative piglets, but the oldest one are PCR positive because of this. So you also have a PRRS infection there, and that's, of course, that's also moved to the finishing barn. We don't want to have young piglets have any contact with the older animals. That's back to the infection chain. So they should stay away, so at least we don't have infection back to the sow herd. And all gills that are coming in, even if it's your own, so if you're using your own gills, they should be put through a quarantine period. So you can keep this virus infection away. And we recommend a 12-week quarantine period. So that is the whole herd approach. It's quite easy to put on a vaccination program. Vaccinate with Ingvac PRRS MLV every 3 to 4 months. Vaccinate piglets around weaning and vaccinate gills at entrance and have a 12-week quarantine period, and then monitor a program. But you need to do it all. And to do that all in a systematic way, the 5-step process is a very good tool. But in order to ensure that all the management rules are followed, you need to train people. It's not enough to tell. You need to train them individually, and basically you have to go to the farm and show each of the steps how you do it. And that's a hard job because you have a change of people all the time. So you have new people coming in, old people leaving. So it's a continuous job to train. So just consider that with PRRS, the only easy day was yesterday. So if we want to have protected herds, we need to protect the piglets as well in order to reduce transmission and shedding. Thank you very much.